The warship hung above the jungle like a silent predator. Its dark metal surface gleamed under the dim sunlight, casting an enormous shadow over the endless green below. Inside, the command deck was alive with alien officers moving in perfect coordination, their reptilian scales catching the glow of the control panels. General Xerox stood at the center, arms crossed, watching the holographic map of Earth with an amused expression. His golden eyes flickered with contempt as he zoomed in on the dense wilderness. It was laughable, primitive. He had conquered planets with acid seas, frozen wastelands, and metal cities that stretched beyond the horizon. And now his empire had sent him here, to this backwater world where the strongest defense was a collection of trees and rivers. Pathetic, Xerox muttered, his clawed hand tapping against the console. A young officer beside him straightened. General, the first wave is ready for deployment. Xerox nodded. Send them in, sweep the jungle, burn anything that resists. The massive warship rumbled as the drop ships launched, sleek and sharp like blades slicing through the sky. They descended toward the jungle in perfect formation, their engines roaring like distant thunder. On board, squads of elite alien soldiers sat in silence, gripping their weapons. Their armor was nearly indestructible, their visors scanning for movement below. The moment the ships touched the ground, the jungle swallowed them whole. The air was thick, damp, filled with the distant cries of unseen creatures. The towering trees loomed above, their branches so dense they nearly blocked out the sky. Strange, twisting vines draped over fallen logs, and the scent of damp earth filled the air. Steam rose from hidden pools, curling like ghostly fingers through the undergrowth. The lead squad activated their scanners, expecting to pick up life signs instantly. Instead, the screens flickered with static. One soldier adjusted his helmet, tapping the side in frustration. The signal was weak. Too weak. Keep moving, the commander ordered. The first few minutes were uneventful. The soldiers moved in formation, weapons raised, scanning the jungle for any sign of human resistance. But there was nothing, only silence. Then something shifted. A soldier at the rear glanced over his shoulder. Had something moved? He turned back, gripping his rifle a little tighter. His heart pounded against his chest. A single leaf drifted down from the canopy, spinning lazily in the air. It landed on his armored shoulder. The soldier took another step forward, then stopped. A whisper, not words, not a voice. Just a sound, like the wind moving through the leaves or something breathing. He spun around. Nothing. The squad pushed deeper into the jungle, their boots sinking into the damp soil. Shadows stretched across the trees, twisting into strange shapes. The silence pressed against them, unnatural, suffocating. Then, without warning, the soldier at the back of the squad was gone. No sound, no struggle. One moment he was there, the next vanished. The others didn't notice at first. They marched forward, their focus on the path ahead. It wasn't until they reached a small clearing that one of them turned and spoke. Rexar, cover the rear. No answer. The soldier frowned, stepping back. Rexar, still nothing. Panic flickered through the squad. The commander activated his communicator. Squad 6, report. Do you copy? Silence. Then a sound crackled through the earpiece. Faint. A low, raspy breath. A whisper. Run. The line went dead. The soldiers turned as one, their weapons aimed at the jungle. Their thermal scanners still showed nothing. The trees stood motionless. The vines hung limp. But something was out there. Something unseen. Watching. The commander swallowed hard. Fall back. Now. They moved quickly, retracing their steps, stepping over the same roots and rocks they had just passed. But the jungle had changed. The path seemed different, twisted, narrower. A soldier broke into a sprint, then stopped mid-stride. His foot had caught something. Not a root, not a vine. Something else. A rope, a trap. The ground beneath him collapsed. He had only a second to scream before he was swallowed by darkness. The remaining soldiers froze. They aimed their weapons in every direction, their fingers tight on the triggers. The jungle had come alive around them. Leaves rustled without wind. Shadows moved without light. Then the first shot rang out. Not from them. From the trees. The first soldier dropped before he even realized he had been hit. The second followed an instant later. The remaining ones fired blindly, their bullets tearing through the foliage. But they saw nothing. No enemy, no movement. Just the jungle, watching. The commander's breath came fast and shallow. He pressed a trembling finger to his communicator. Command, requesting immediate evac. We're under attack. The transmission cut out. From the command deck of the warship, General Xerox frowned. He tapped the console, watching as his squad's life signals blinked out one by one. Impossible. Something was wrong. His golden eyes narrowed as he stared down at the jungle, now dark and endless beneath the warship. For the first time since the invasion began, doubt crept into his mind, and far below, in the depths of the jungle, unseen figures moved through the shadows, silent, patient. The hunt had begun. The jungle was breathing. Or at least, that's what it felt like to the remaining alien soldiers as they crouched low, scanning the darkness between the trees. Their weapons were raised, fingers trembling over the triggers. The air was thick with moisture, their helmets fogging up as they struggled to control their breathing. Something had taken their squad mates. Not an explosion, not gunfire, just silence. 1 second they were there, the next, gone. The commander, Korak, pressed a button on his gauntlet, switching to night vision. His visor glowed green, painting the jungle in an eerie light. Nothing, just vines, branches, and endless darkness. "Stay close," he whispered. "No one moves alone." The remaining soldiers nodded, shifting their formation into a tight circle. Every movement felt wrong. Every step sounded too loud. The jungle swallowed all other noises. No birds, no insects, not even the wind. Then the clicking started, soft, rhythmic, coming from the trees. It wasn't the sound of a natural creature. It was deliberate, like something was communicating. Korak signaled for silence. His soldiers held their breath, eyes darting between the trees. The clicking stopped. A moment passed. Then something whistled through the air. A sharp cry rang out as one of the soldiers dropped, a thin, black dart embedded in his neck. He convulsed, his body seizing up before going still. The squad erupted into chaos, weapons firing in every direction. Muzzle flashes lit up the trees, but they weren't shooting at anything, just shadows, leaves, empty space. Korak grabbed one of his men and pulled him behind a fallen log. "Stop shooting. You're wasting ammo." The gunfire slowed. The jungle was still again. Then another whisper. It came from the darkness. Soft, almost playful. A voice. "Lost." Korak's blood ran cold. It wasn't in his language. It was in theirs. In perfect, flawless execution. A soldier to his right whimpered. "They're hunting us." More movement. More whispers. The aliens turned in frantic circles, trying to find the source. But there was nothing. Then the jungle moved. A figure dropped from the trees, landing soundlessly behind one of the soldiers. A blade flashed, and the alien's head snapped back, a choked gurgle escaping his throat. The others turned. Too late. More figures appeared from the foliage, moving like shadows, camouflaged, silent, deadly. Korak fired, but the figure in front of him melted into the darkness before the shot connected. A brutal force struck him from behind, knocking the weapon from his grip. He hit the ground, gasping, the thick mud swallowing him. Hoots pressed against his chest. A human, masked, painted in jumble colors, eyes cold and sharp like a predator. Korak tried to speak, but the human raised a finger to his lips. The man whispered. Then the jungle swallowed Korak whole. Pain. That was the first thing Korak felt when he woke up. His head throbbed and his limbs were bound, thick vines wrapped tightly around his wrists and ankles. He was lying on damp earth, his armor caked with mud. The air was thick with the scent of wet leaves and something metallic. Blood. Slowly, he lifted his head. He wasn't alone. A handful of his surviving soldiers were there, bound just like him. Their eyes were wide with fear, their bodies stiff. One of them whimpered. Another was breathing too fast, chest rising and falling in sharp, panicked bursts. Then he saw them, the humans. They stood in the shadows, half hidden by the jungle. Their bodies were covered in dirt and paint, blending so perfectly with the trees that Korak could barely tell where the jungle ended and the warriors began. Their weapons were silent, not the bulky energy rifles the Empire used, but something more primal. Knives, bows, small deadly firearms wrapped in cloth to muffle the sound. They moved without a single wasted motion, their eyes locked onto the captives with a cold, calculating stare. Predators. One of the soldiers struggled against his bindings. "Let us go." The figure stepped forward. Taller than the others, his skin smeared with streaks of green and black. His face was mostly covered except for his eyes, sharp, piercing, filled with something Korak couldn't quite name. Not anger, not cruelty, amusement. The human crouched in front of Korak and studied him, tilting his head slightly. Then he reached into a pouch on his belt and pulled something out. A small black dart. The same kind that had taken down their squad. Korak swallowed hard. The human rolled the dart between his fingers before speaking. His voice was low, quiet, steady. You thought Earth was weak. He held up the dart between two fingers. How did that work out for you? Korak clenched his jaw, saying nothing. The human let out a small chuckle and tucked the dart away. Then he leaned in closer. Your mistake, he whispered, was thinking this jungle belongs to you. A sharp whistle echoed through the trees. Instantly, the other humans melted back into the foliage, disappearing like ghosts. The leader stood up, stepping away, leaving Korak and his soldiers tied up on the jungle floor. And then, without another word, he vanished. The jungle was silent again. Korak's breathing was shallow. He pulled at his bindings, his pulse hammering against his skull. They weren't dead. Not yet. But the humans had left them alive for a reason, and that terrified him more than anything else. The jungle was suffocating. The thick air pressed against Korak's lungs as he stumbled forward, his limbs aching from hours of captivity. His wrists were raw from the vines that had bound him, and his head spun from dehydration. The humans had cut them loose, but they weren't free. They were prey. His remaining soldiers moved in a tight cluster, their weapons clutched like lifelines. Their nerves were shot, their eyes darting between the trees, searching for movement. But there was nothing. No sign of the enemy, no sound beyond their own ragged breathing. And that was the problem. The jungle was too quiet. A soldier to his left wiped sweat from his brow. They could kill us, he muttered. Why didn't they? Korak didn't answer. He knew why. The humans were playing with them, testing them, watching. A lesson. They could have ended this already, but they wanted the invaders to understand what real fear was. A sharp snap echoed through the trees. The squad spun, weapons raised. Nothing. Just a fallen branch. The soldier in the rear exhaled. We need to an explosion. The jungle erupted in fire and dirt as the ground beneath him vanished. One moment he was there, the next he was gone, swallowed by a hidden pit lined with sharpened stakes. The squad barely had time to react before another explosion ripped through the trees, sending a hail of splintered wood and shrapnel into their ranks. Panic took over. They're everywhere, one soldier screamed, firing wildly into the trees. His bullets tore through leaves, cutting nothing but air. A shadow moved, a blur of motion from above. Then another soldier dropped, a knife buried deep in his throat. Korak didn't wait. He grabbed the nearest soldier and shoved him forward. Run! Move now! The survivors bolted, crashing through the undergrowth, their heavy boots sinking into the soft earth. But the jungle was a labyrinth. Every path twisted, every tree looked the same. Vines hung like traps, thick roots clawing at their feet. They weren't moving towards safety. They were running deeper into the humans' territory. And then Korak heard it. A whisper. Not a voice. A signal. A low rhythmic clicking, hidden beneath the natural sounds of the jungle. Commands, orders. The humans were talking to each other. Korak's stomach twisted. They weren't dealing with mindless savages. They were up against something far worse. They were up against professionals. The soldier beside him tripped, crashing to the ground with a grunt. Korak turned to help. An arrow hissed through the air. The soldier twitched once, then stomped forward, unmoving. Korak clenched his jaw. His forces were dwindling, and he couldn't see the enemy, but they could see him. He forced himself to move, his instincts screaming that the worst was yet to come, because the jungle was alive, and it was hunting them. Korak ran. His breath came in sharp, ragged gasps, his legs burning as he pushed forward. His remaining soldiers were just behind him, their heavy boots pounding against the damp earth. Every step felt like a mistake. Every direction felt like a trap. Because it was. The humans weren't chasing them. They didn't have to. They were hurting them, pushing them deeper. The air grew thick with mist, the jungle floor uneven beneath their feet. Roots jutted out like grasping fingers and low-hanging branches clawed at their armor. The night was closing in, but there was no safety in the darkness. Only more shadows, more whispers. Another soldier stumbled. Korak barely caught him before he hit the ground. Keep moving, he hissed. They're watching. No one argued. A rustling sound made them all freeze. It came from the canopy, slow, deliberate. Korak's grip tightened on his weapon. He scanned the treetops, but there was nothing, just swaying leaves and endless green. Then he saw it, a single red dot, barely visible, floating in the air, a targeting laser. His eyes widened. Down, a suppressed gunshot cracked through the silence. The soldier beside him jerked, a fine mist of blood spraying from his helmet. He crumpled without a sound. More shots followed, but they weren't random. They were precise. Every bullet found its mark. The aliens never even had a chance to fire back. Fall back, fall back. Korak barked, but there was nowhere to go. The jungle was alive with movement now. Shadows weaving between the trees, figures dropping from the branches without a sound. One soldier tried to raise his weapon. A machete flashed. The arm holding the rifle fell to the ground first. The rest of the body followed. Korak barely had time to react before something struck him from behind. A brutal, crushing force against his back, knocking him to the ground. Mud filled his mouth. His vision blurred. When he looked up, he saw boots. Human boots. He forced himself onto his hands and knees, gasping, his pulse roaring in his ears. He reached for his rifle, a blade pressed against his throat. He froze. The jungle warriors had him. Korak knelt in the mud, his pulse hammering in his skull. The blade pressed against his throat, cold and unyielding. The jungle warriors had him, and this time, there was no escape. His remaining soldiers were either dead or missing, their bodies swallowed by the jungle. The ones who had tried to fight had been silenced in seconds. There was no shouting, no final stand, just quick, efficient strikes from the shadows. Now, Korak was alone. The human standing over him didn't speak at first. He simply stared, studying Korak like he was deciding whether or not to finish him off. His face was masked, his body smeared with jungle paint. He had no armor, no glowing technology, just a rifle slung over his back and knife in his hand, and eyes that looked more dangerous than any weapon. Slowly, the human crouched, the blade never leaving Korak's throat. "You don't belong here," the human said, his voice calm, almost amused. Korak forced himself to stay still. Any sudden movement, and he'd be dead before he could react. "This planet, this jungle," the human tilted his head slightly. "You thought it was yours for the taking, didn't you?" Korak clenched his jaw. The human chuckled. "I've seen your kind before. Big armies, big ships. You come here thinking you're untouchable." He leaned in, lowering his voice. "But this place doesn't care how advanced you are. Out here, your tech doesn't matter." He gestured to the dense jungle around them. "This?" His eyes narrowed. "This belongs to us." Korak swallowed. His mind raced. There had to be a way out, a way to turn the situation. He took a slow breath. "Kill me and my people will send more," he said, his voice hoarse. "More ships, more soldiers. You can't fight the entire empire." The human was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled. "That's what the last invaders said." Korak's blood ran cold. The human stood up, nodding to the shadows. Instantly, more figures emerged from the trees, silent, disciplined, moving like ghosts. Korak felt rough hands yank him to his feet. His wrists were tied behind his back, the restraints made not from rope or metal, but woven vines. Strong. Unbreakable. The human leader stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "You're not going to die here." Korak's breath hitched. "Not going to die? Then what?" The human smirked. "You're going to watch?" Before Korak could react, they shoved him forward, deeper into the jungle. And that's when he realized the truth. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about fear. And the real lesson had only just begun. They marched Korak through the jungle. His legs were weak, his body battered, but the humans didn't care. They moved with precision, never wasting energy, never letting him lag behind. Every step took him deeper into their world. The jungle wasn't just their battleground, it was their home. He saw it now, the way they moved, the way they blended into the environment as if they were part of it. They didn't just survive here, they thrived. The jungle warriors had no massive fortresses, no towering citadels of steel and glass, but they had something worse, traps. Korak saw them as they walked, pits lined with sharpened stakes, hidden under layers of leaves, snare lines stretched between trees, waiting for the slightest misstep, camouflage firing nests, perfectly concealed until it was too late. This was why the jungle was quiet. It wasn't empty, it was prepared. Finally, they reached a clearing. The humans shoved Korak to his knees, right at the edge of a deep ravine. The air smelled of damp earth and blood. That's when he saw them. His men, or what was left of them. Some were tied to trees, stripped of their weapons, their faces hollow with exhaustion. Others lay motionless, their bodies barely visible in the undergrowth. But the worst part wasn't the captured soldiers. It was the silence. No cries for help. No desperate pleas. Just broken warriors who had learned the truth too late. Korak felt a rough hand grip his shoulder. The human leader knelt beside him. "Now you understand," he said, his voice low. "We don't need fleets. We don't need energy weapons." He gestured at the jungle. "This is our weapon." Korak stayed ahead, his mind reeling. His empire had planned for resistance. They had studied Earth's military history, analyzed its armies, its defenses. But they had never accounted for this. The jungle didn't just belong to the humans. It was the humans, and the worst part, they were enjoying this. Korak had fought countless battles across the galaxy, but never like this. Never against an enemy that didn't just fight back, but made war into an art. The human leader leaned in close. "Tell your empire," he whispered. "Tell them what you saw here, what you felt, and if they ever think about coming back." He smiled. "We'll be waiting." Then, without another word, the humans melted into the trees. The jungle swallowed them whole, leaving only the rustling of leaves and the weight of Korak's own failure. For the first time in his life, he understood true fear.